Today we're on a journey across Italy, all the way from Venice to Rome, and in the process we're on the hunt for one artist, the 15th century painter Piero della Francesca. In the process we're going to be soaking up the wealth of cultural history that Italy has to offer, sweeping across the cradle of the Italian Renaissance. But first let's rewind to tell you why we're chasing Piero della Francesca. This is Piero della Francesca, a painter renowned for his mastery of perspective, geometry and hats. And this is Parham Ghalamdar, an artist who's been reimagining Piero's work with a surrealist twist, with a particular obsession for one of his paintings. Born in the small town of Sansepolcro, Piero's work was grounded in the precision of Euclidean geometry. But his world was on the brink of change, with realistic optical effects soon becoming increasingly adopted. And so his unique style, with its mathematical prowess, is maybe some of the last works before an explosion of hyper-realism that dominated the late Renaissance. In this video, we'll take you on a journey across Italy to see 5 works that capture the essence of his output.
Are you filming already?
Yeah, everything's on.
Oh shit.
First, we're here at the Galleria dell'Accademia in Venice to catch a small painting by Piero della Francesca, Saint Jerome and a Devotee. Maybe you could just tell us how you first encountered his work and then why it inspired your practice.
My first encounter with Piero's paintings was within the pages of Painter's Secret Geometry. What captivated my attention in the first encounter was the efficiency of Piero's paintings and how he could squeeze out the maximum result by using the minimal amount of information on the surface.
The surface of the park are like angular, they have an angle to them. It looks very theatrical.
For instance, his painting called Constantine's Dream is entirely shaped around a cylinder, as if he was on a mission to exhaust that shape. Yes or no?
Yeah. Next we've come to Florence because tucked away in the Uffizi gallery among a plethora of iconic artworks is a beautiful double portrait by Piero della Francesca. His use of perspective just about predates the work of people like Caravaggio or Raphael, or especially Vermeer, who were using optical lenses to make an image that was more realistic. Within Piero's work, it feels like there's a lot of these characters that are placed at different levels within the foreground and midground. How did that aspect of his work affect how you were painting in your work?
Through the Renaissance, painting was trying to be this fabricated lie, this beautifully constructed window. What I love about Piero's work is that it's very theatrical. It's more of a setting up a model of the world in front of you.
Portraits of the Duke and Duchess of Urbino was originally a diptych held together by a hinge. The work portrays Duke Federico da Montefeltro and his wife Battista Sforza. Compared to a lot of other works in the Uffizi, the striking thing about this portrait is its side profile pose. Although reminiscent of classical portrait medals, it was likely painted in this way because the Duke had lost his right eye in a tournament.
Looking at the painting in real life, it immediately reminded me of Disneyland and how they play with the scale to make these miniature castles look bigger. And it sometimes kind of breaks the fourth wall.
I look at my paintings just like a play. The actors and actresses of my play are constantly going back and forth between being in this isolated world of the play and also breaking the fourth wall and interacting with the audience. That's perhaps why Piero's works was very appealing.
The panel on the other side, so not the portrait panel, the background seemed to curve upwards.
Yeah,
so it was in some ways too big as a landscape.
I cannot help but to associate them with video games and how there is always an edge to the map or something is just repeated for the sake of the visuals. These are all different ways of looking at the world. At the end of the day, painting is this thing that demands looking, demands attention. All I've been trying to take away from all these masters is different qualities to create tension on the surface, I would say.
Next we made it to Rome to catch what is possibly the most unremarkable and beaten up Piero of them all.
First of all, Italy has so much heritage, it's impossible to preserve it all. Probably what gets funding becomes very political. And secondly, Piero was way early contributing to the advancement of painting, and so much happened after him. It would make sense to have a Piero that is beaten up.
In what you might imagine would be the city that has everything, finding a Piero was not so easy. Between 1458 and 1459, he was in Rome to execute a fresco for Pope Pius II in the Vatican Palace. This, however, was later destroyed in the 16th century to be replaced by something a touch more modern by Raphael. But one work remained, tucked away in the corner of the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore. Maybe we could just talk about the one in Rome, in quite contrast to all the rest of the church.
Oh my God, yeah.
Which was beautifully preserved, which I found then such a peculiar instance that this one work stands above the shop, dishevelled, forgotten, crumbling away.
It was very interesting because what got my attention first was that you couldn't even take a photo from the ceiling in that room because the lighting was there to facilitate the bookshop rather than the ceiling, Piero's works. And me standing in the middle of a room perceiving the ceiling, like it almost felt like I'm in the way for the queue to buy these ridiculous religious products.
Within that kind of idea of preservation, how do you perceive your work lasting over the years? Or do you have an idea about how you want your work to be preserved?
I think it's the people, the humans, the life itself, the painters that matter. If I'm not gonna receive attention and I'm not gonna be supported and be a valued member of society, I don't want my paintings to exist either. You know, when a movie arrived in Iran or India or somewhere else, there were all these painters who were commissioned to paint an advertisement for the cinema, and they used to paint the portrait of the antagonist and protagonist, make it more dramatic by painting an explosion and a gun. After the film sold, the banner was taken down and the banners were ignored and were irrelevant. Preservation of these paintings is not my job anymore. It's the job of the institutions, it's the job of the curators, it's the job of the collectors. Those people need to come in and take responsibility for the rest of it, if this matters at all.
Today we've taken a quick detour off the beaten track to come to Sansepolcro and the birthplace of Piero della Francesca. Tucked away in a side street, Il Museo Civico held a number of newly restored works by Piero, one of which, The Resurrection, includes what is thought to be the only known self-portrait of him. Whilst the triangular composition leads the eye towards Jesus' face, the use of two vanishing points gave Piero the innovative ability to create a dual perspective, to see two stories simultaneously head-on. And to maintain some kind of painterly harmony, you might notice that one of the guards has no legs.
Piero's work was innovative in the true literal meaning of the word. There was this technological advancement in the name of Christianity. The first attempt for perspective, for this kind of constructed gaze. Also have this in mind that a lot of these works are not perceived in the right context anymore. There is some chaos in there as well.
Because it also reminds you how changeable painting is when you move it around different spaces. You're allowing for the possibility of a kind of perfect viewing of it, rather than a kind of distracted viewing in the case of the Uffizi with all these other masterpieces around.
With like adverts popping up every minute.
Finally, we've made it to Arezzo, because tucked away in an unassuming basilica here is the golden ticket of Piero della Francesca's work, the legend of the true cross. Maybe you could just say what it was like to see that work in person, given you've imagined it and seen it referenced in so many books.
Being in the same space that the painter actually created those murals, and the paintings not being in a chronological order, not from top to bottom, left to right, I couldn't help but to notice what a cinematic experience it was, as if that environment, those frescoes, were a pre-modern equivalent of the cinema that we have today.
In this work, Piero narrates the Christian story of the cross over 13 episodes, beginning with the death of Adam, where a seed was placed in Adam's mouth in the Garden of Eden and which sprouted the tree from which the cross was made. Rather than a chronological order, the fresco instead focuses on symmetrically correspondent scenes, with Piero aiming for a visual rather than narrative balance. And significant for us is episode number 5, The Dream of Constantine, depicting Constantine's great vision of the cross in a beautifully cylindrical tent.
I was first overwhelmed, then looking very closely, I saw a lot more details. When you shrink that image in your screen, you're basically looking at a silhouette of the original painting. It was very overwhelming because there's so much to see. Perhaps it is designed to be like that. A lot of films and series are not produced or released and watched necessarily in a chronological order. Each panel felt like a prequel and sequel. The first panel starts with Adam and Eve. The final panels tell the story of the battles between Persians and Greeks for taking the cross back to Jerusalem. So it goes beyond the life of Jesus Christ. And because the story of the Legend of True Cross is still unfolding, it felt like we are part of the film. For instance, during the coronation, Pope gifted 2 shards of the True Cross to Charles I. We are still living in this legend.
So maybe specifically we could just talk about the Dream of Constantine, which is the 5th episode in the fresco and is that image of this kind of strange tent. Maybe you could talk about why you were drawn to that image particularly and the kind of connotations that you feel it brings to your work.
Beyond the objective mathematical composition of it, there are so many important features in the painting. For instance, it's depicting the first moment that Christianity became institutionalized. Constantine was the first Christian emperor. But even beyond that, me coming from an asylum-seeking background, a tent is a place of dreaming. A tent is a shelter without a foundation, ready to move, ready to go. If you give enough characteristics to a tent, it could serve as a metaphorical portrait or figure. A tent is always an outpost at the edge of the unknown, at the edge of the map. All these meanings to it, all these objective historical facts, all of them were really interesting layers to the painting. Every single painting that we saw, there was some drama in there was some action in there was some violence, and the only peaceful moment that I discovered was when the painter was painting the texture of marble on plaster. I wanted my paintings to be very peaceful now.
Sweeping across the cradle of the Italian, this is too many pictures, among a plethora of iconic artworks.
I love it.